Welcome to the 7 Skills for the Future podcast series. I'm Emma Sue Prince, author of 7 Skills for the Future, and this podcast is all about developing skills that you already have inside you. They are adaptability, critical thinking, empathy, integrity, being proactive, being optimistic, and resilience. And today I'm interviewing Sarah Mercer, and Sarah is a professor at the University of Graz, Austria, where she focuses on language learning and teacher well-being. And I'm really keen to talk to her about her take on these 7 skills. So I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Mercer to our podcast today. I first met Sarah at a conference for business English teaching last November in Malta, and I really connected with her talk about socio-emotional competencies as 21st century skills, life skills, and the role that emotional intelligence plays in that. So for me, there was a strong link with some, possibly all of the 7 skills, but I'm particularly interested in Sarah's views on self-awareness, the role of mindfulness, empathy, and understanding about our strengths. So welcome, Sarah. First of all, can you explain a little bit more about your work and your research and what you do for us?
Hi, Emma. It's very nice to be here. Thank you very much for asking me to join you. I work as a researcher in the field of ELT methodology. So I work at the University of Graz in Austria. My research started originally looking at the psychology of language learners. So looking at what their needs were, their motivations, their self-concept, the kind of beliefs that they had, particularly growth mindsets, were of interest to me. And then over time, as I started to understand that basically teaching is a relationship, it's between two people and there are 2 sides to that relationship, I started to become more interested in the teacher side of things, which is generally under-researched in comparison to the research that's been done on learners. And I started becoming interested in their well-being and what helps them flourish in their jobs and how they function best and their well-being, their motivations, their sense of self, their beliefs, those kinds of things. So that's what took me into this area of looking at socio-emotional competences, not only for their ability to teach well and to understand their learners and their relationships with others, but also as a source of support for their own well-being to help them function to the best of their abilities in their jobs.
So it's not just for teachers. I mean, this applies to anybody. And self-awareness is a big component of building skills like resilience and adaptability and empathy. And you can't have any behavior change without that. So what would you tell us about self-awareness?
Yeah, I agree very strongly with you. I think it's a foundation of empowering you to take some control of the things that happen to you in life and where you're going and how you deal with these things. So I think you need a degree of self-awareness to understand your emotional triggers, how you respond to things, your habits, your goals, what it is that you feel you need, what your preferences are. And I think that sort of under self-awareness is the basis of many other skills and competences that you talk about, but that are generally needed to be able to function well in our professional and our personal lives. So I think self-awareness for me is a foundation, but we do have to be careful that it doesn't become sort of indulgent navel-gazing, which is not constructive. It's more about having this awareness of oneself and starting to use that in a way to empower yourself to take more control and give more direction to your life.
Yes, exactly. And I know in your talk you mentioned being able to ask oneself questions like, what triggers stress for me, what brings me joy in my work, how do I deal with things that are difficult for me. And of course, that's quite a reflective process, and being able to ask yourself those types of questions in a way, we rush around all day long from thing to thing. To what extent do you think people can actually bring more of that kind of reflection into their day-to-day lives?
I think it's quite difficult to do because we get caught up in we're just sort of on this treadmill, aren't we, that we're rushing, from one thing to the next, doing the next thing and concentrating on that. And there's not much time for reflection and taking stock. But very often there are challenges we encounter or certain events that trigger a process of reflection. And it's a response to that and being able to sort of take stock. But I think learning to take a little bit more time to say, I think there's a sort of general awareness that, my life is something that I can proactively to some degree engender, that I'm not just reactive to what happens around me, but that there's things that I can do to proactively direct and guide the way that things develop for me and the way I move towards my goals.
I know that you also mentioned that if you can work and build on your own strengths, that can, that can help with building that awareness. And some of the strengths that I noticed you writing about were things like perseverance and kindness and creativity. Can you give some more examples of those kinds of strengths and how how do we find out what those are for ourselves personally?
Yeah, so there's a view. So my work's been very heavily influenced by the positive psychology movement. So positive psychology basically arose in the field of psychology as a kind of response to the fact that psychology was very much dominated by a deficit view of looking at what was wrong with people and how to remedy that, what kind of disorders there are and how to remedy that. And a group of researchers came to the conclusion that actually to understand life, we need to know what works well. How do people flourish? What are people's strengths? What contributes a good life? And that if we want to have a balanced view of people's psychology, we need to not only look at what's going wrong and how to remedy it, but what's going right and how can we further build on that and strengthen that. And that's where a lot of this research on looking at people's strengths came from. There's something called the VIA character strengths, the Values in Action Character Strengths Inventory, that was designed, I think it's by Seligman and Peterson. And you can go online, if you Google VIE, people will find it quite easily. And you can do the questionnaire, they do a survey there and they tell you what your strengths are. And it helps you to identify through a series of questions where your strengths lie. And it's things like perseverance, humility, humor, love of learning, kindness, all those kinds of things. And these have been found supposedly to be universal across cultures. And when you do this survey, it helps you to identify those that are core to who you are, that are very central to the kind of person that you are, and those are which are more peripheral. And it's not to say that you're fixed in these categories and you can't develop other skills or you can't develop other strengths, but knowing what your strengths are, you can build on those. You can find ways to integrate them in your life. And, it helps you to become stronger when you're focusing on the things that you're good at. So not always just looking at what your weaknesses are and how to improve that. I mean, that's something that we do generally, but also saying, what am I good at? What are my strengths? What do I enjoy doing? What is something that I can really contribute and bring into this, and finding ways to build that in can be very positive for our well-being.
What support do you think teachers get to do that kind of work on themselves? I mean, I can't imagine that they, that's necessarily part of their professional development, for example.
I wish desperately that it was. I feel very strongly that policymakers, institutions, society in general has grossly underestimated, misjudged just how much support teachers need. It's a caring profession, so teachers are used to being oriented to other people, to their learners, and that's nice, and that will always be the case. But when you understand that it's part of two relationships, if teachers are not in the right place psychologically, if they've not got that kind of inner strength, support and well-being, they are not going to be able to teach to the best of the abilities. I took a long, hard look at very many professional development programs and was bitterly disappointed to discover that virtually all of them focused almost exclusively on what the teacher can do for the learner. Now, while that remains extremely important, what about the teacher themselves? What about spending some time making sure that the teacher is in the best place they can possibly be in order to teach? I think for me, that's something I feel very, very strongly about, that's something that is under-researched, underdeveloped, and does not get any sort of talk time generally. And teaching is a very stressful profession. I mean, there's a lot of joys in the profession, a lot of things that we get a lot of strength and pleasure out of. But it is a stressful profession, and there is a need for teachers to be given space and time and institutional support to work on their well-being, not as a luxury, but as a foundation for good teaching.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, teachers are burning out and they're getting stressed, and I think the whole issue around stress goes across a lot of different professions as well. I want to ask you about mindfulness, because mindfulness is a big buzz term at the moment, although it's been around for a very long time. Because we use mindfulness exercises in our workshops, and it never ceases to amaze me how impactful people find it. So people, all different kinds of people, from young people, from people who've been unemployed, corporate lawyers. I mean, really diverse groups of people. When we do mindfulness with them, it's almost like a sort of a relief for them. Can you say more about the power of mindfulness?
Well, I have to admit I'm no expert on this, but I'm well aware of the research that says how powerful this can be. I mean, I know that there's sort of mixed views on this, but I think it goes a little bit back to what you were saying earlier when we were talking about self-awareness. That mindfulness is, for me, it's got a few components. I mean, I'm not talking about any of the sort of the religious connotations that go with it, but more the sense of being able to be fully in the present. Not in not in an evaluative way, not in a judgmental way, just being aware and taking time to be in the present, whether that's enjoying a meal and your food and being very conscious of it, in a conversation with somebody, just enjoying and being fully in the conversation. I think digital technologies have played a big role in making mindfulness in the present very difficult for people to do. But I think learning to utilize that time to quieten your mind, to give yourself a chance to focus on the here and now, and to be accepting of ourselves and our emotions and how we're experiencing things, and to savor experiences, I think that can be incredibly powerful long term.
And it also encourages self-reflection, doesn't it? So it can help with awareness building and so on. There's also a lot of research on the power of gratitude and the links of gratitude to optimism, and how just writing down a few things a day, what you're thankful for, can really help. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think of all the interventions in the positive psychology literature, there's various interventions that have been researched. The one on gratitude is the one with the strongest body of research that to show its effectiveness as an intervention. On a very personal note, I developed the habit of every day before I go to sleep taking note of the things that I'm grateful for, and I found it personally extremely effective in helping me to take stock in a positive way, also to learn as a habit to start looking for the positive things that are happening in your life every day. There is a tendency sometimes to focus on the negative, to focus on the things that are going wrong. And it's nice to very consciously stop yourself and stop and say, this is something I'm very grateful for. This is something that went well today. And these are people, conversations, experiences that I'm grateful that I had. And I think gratitude can be very powerful, not only in enhancing your well-being and your positivity of the moment, but also helping to train you to see the positives in experiences and day-to-day interactions, or it becomes a habit fundamentally.
Yes. I'm the same. I write down what I'm grateful for every morning, and then again in the evening, looking back on the day. And yeah, you're right. It does make a difference. I think. Do you think perhaps we are a bit biased towards, or do you think our brains perhaps could be a bit biased towards looking for the negative things?
Yeah, I think there is a negativity bias, inbuilt negativity bias, but it certainly can be overcome, but very consciously by looking for the positives. Like I say, if you make something like gratitude or silver linings activity, if you make these kinds of things a habit, you automatically start to see positives more. And again, this notion of mindfulness, if you become more mindful of your experiences, the things around you that you see, your senses, that you learn to focus on the beauty of things that you see, the beauty of other people, conversations, experiences. I think that positivity can become a habit. You can you can develop more of a positivity bias.
Yes, yeah, and these are two very simple things that actually anybody could start doing: being more present and cultivating, an attitude of being grateful. Empathy. I know you've written about different kinds of tasks and activities that we can either undertake ourselves or teach others. So I wanted to ask you about that, and to what extent you believe we can actually teach empathy to other people.
Yeah, very much so. I think there's a lot of research literature in the social emotional learning category, the SEL category, that shows that you can develop these competences in others, that they're not fixed character traits, but these are things that can be developed, that you can improve your skills in. To a certain degree. I think in today's current global climate, skills such as empathy, tolerance, open-mindedness, understanding of others, I think these are key competences that we want to develop in ourselves, but also very much in our learners. And I think there's almost a moral obligation to be developing these skills. And I think many curricula across the globe that are looking at 21st century skills also incorporate some of these skills. And I think they're very important because we function in communities. We are fundamentally social beings, and developing these skills are important for getting on with others, being successful in our environments, whether that's personally and professionally. And I think on a sort of global scale, I think developing skills of empathy are hugely important to foster cooperation and tolerance.
And I do have just one last question, because you've made me think of something else. But language teachers, because English language teaching, to what extent do you think English language teachers can start to bring in the teaching of these kinds of skills into their language classrooms? So things like mindfulness and being present, well-being. Do you think it's possible to combine that with English language teaching?
Absolutely. In fact, I've been writing with two colleagues of mine, Tammy Gregerson and Peter McIntyre. We've been writing about something that we call positive language education. And by this, we mean that you can integrate the teaching of linguistic competences along with the teaching of, if you want to call them life skills, well-being competences, that the two can be taught at the same time in an integrated way. If we look at what's being done, for example, in CLIL or EMI classrooms, there's a lot about teaching, for example, in CLIL, that you have double learning objectives.
Yes.
And language teaching is ideally suited, particularly with the emphasis on communicative language classrooms, that it's ideally suited to looking at bringing in other skills that you can teach at the same time. So I feel very strongly that we can, as language teachers, we have the perfect opportunity to find ways to foster growth mindset, empathy, critical thinking skills, a sense of resilience. These are skills that can be taught, and they can be taught through language. And combining both in a sustainable way, I believe is manageable, is something that we can and should be doing.
Oh, so perhaps this new research will be the subject of your next talk.
I very much hope so. I feel strongly that there's great potential in this, but we have to now find ways of developing teacher training to do this, looking at ways that become sustainable. But I think there is a lot of potential that when we teach these skills of optimism, empathy, growth mindsets, and so on, these skills actually help them to be better learners as well. Not only does it equip them with skills for life, it equips them with skills that helps them to function well in school. So it's a win-win, really.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you so much for your time today and for this interview. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm really excited to hear about some of the things that you're researching, and looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you so much. It was very nice to talk to you, and thank you so much for asking me to join you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming onto the show. It's been great having you with us. If you'd like to know more about Sarah's work, you can go to her website, which is sarah.mercer.weebly.com. And if you'd like to know more about the 7 skills, you can check out unimentor.com, where you'll find lots of extra tips and resources to help you strengthen those skills. And of course, the book, 7 Skills for the Future, available in all major bookstores and online. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.